So as I said, we are doing the paper on economic justice. I suppose I've gone back there to the first because we're very much about contrasting poverty and wealth. And you see them there as two signposts. So as always, we're going to unpack the position paper. And this, I trust, will lead us to a deeper understanding of unjust systems in our countries, in our societies, and in the world, and the need to do advocacy. And I put more of a stress here in terms of this paper and advocacy. And we're also unpacking the paper so that the issues can be integrated into the already existing programs. So I'm starting with, in the middle of the position paper, and taking paragraph 5 and paragraph 6C and putting those two together. And it says, we are committed to expand programs and initiatives that bring practical relief from poverty. Programs that generate income and action that supports grassroots civic empowerment of communities and individuals. And all of you in the various countries and units are doing this, bringing practical relief from poverty. And the position paper goes on to list the various activities. And Teresa suggested to you that you review the two videos, one on Mahila, the Economic Justice Project in India, and the story of Bisto Bia. Marvelous projects which have been documented and which are available for us in terms of reviewing and for our inspiration. And these stories and women being empowered, they're not just empowered in any specific area of their lives, but they become empowered economically, socially, and politically. And I think both videos show this. But we also can contrast it with other programs that exist throughout Asia and throughout much of the world. Many of the income generating projects which actually gave rise to handcrafting justice and sharing fare, and the program in Australia. I can't think of the name of it at the moment. And I mention here Hands of Hope in Thailand as the model that gave rise to those outlets of trading circle for Australia. And also looking at Australia in terms of a particular program, NILS, the No Interest Lending Scheme program, of NILS, which has been a program that has collaborated government, civil society and the private sector in terms of providing loans, and has developed many packages over the years. And I was really taken by Fashion Week in Indonesia, which happened in March 2019. Again, these are part of the creativity of our sisters and our programs in trying to have viable projects. I mentioned also here the program in Baguio in the Philippines, the Ubi Jam. So let's move from maybe looking at what we've done and do well and what we continue to review and see how can we do it even better, to asking a question. And the question is, why do people experience poverty? And I'm proposing to you, some people say and others say. And this is very much what the global community is about, in terms of some people say and other people say, and maybe why we don't make much inroads in terms of eradicating poverty. So we can talk about some people being conservatives and other liberals, some people being right, some people being left, some people being capitalist, some people being socialists, conservative or progressive, much the same as conservative or liberal, private versus public. And we find these divisions in religion, in politics, in economics, to do with gender as well. We find these positions can influence how we think. So some say a culture of poverty, and suggests that deprivation is the result of flawed choices and behavior by the people themselves. So it's the person's own fault that they're in poverty. And the recipe for that, or the success sequence, as I've written here, is finish school, get a job, get married, only then have children and work hard. So some say. And this is exactly the scenario that is being presented tonight at the Republican convention. Exactly this. And others say choices are always constrained by circumstances in which people live. People's choices are impacted by their ethnic origin, their class, their gender, their state of health, their level of education, and other factors. So it's the person's own fault, or they're like this because of circumstances that have impacted them. And so a question maybe when you do go to your breakout rooms is, where are you? And I'm proposing a continuum. You can see the green line there, and you know, it extends out. Where are you on this continuum? Do you people think people are poor because these people make flawed choices and their behavior is bad? Or are they poor because they are constrained by circumstances outside themselves? And this is a very important question to ask ourselves, because this will give us our, in a sense, our attitude towards the work we do in terms of eradicating poverty. So the position paper in paragraph 2 says the disparity between the accumulation of wealth and the inescapability of extreme poverty offends the dignity of the human person and is an affront to the common good. So I think you can see what side the position paper is coming from and the side that I will tend to present. Poverty and people continuing to have to live in poverty offends the dignity of human beings and is an affront to the common good. The position paper in paragraph 2 says extreme amassment of wealth and the refusal to share resources and material goods are the cause and effect of both social and spiritual ills. And I put this graphic here. Sometimes they help us in terms of understanding the situation. The wealth of the world's billionaires increased by 900 billion in the last year, which is 2.5 billion a day. This is the profit. This is the increase in wealth to the world's billionaires. And these figures are for 2019. While extreme poverty is increasing in sub-Saharan Africa, and if I can add to that, is increasing everywhere today because of the COVID situation and the close down of work and schools and all of that. So poverty is increasing. This new evidence also shows that 3.4 billion people, almost half of humanity, have barely escaped extreme poverty and are living on less than $5.50 a day. So there's something wrong with this scenario. Some people 2.5 billion a day, and some people more than half of humanity on $5.50 a day. And let me add at this point, I haven't brought it in, I think deliberately, but the World Bank would say we should be able to live on $1.90. There's something wrong there. I don't have to say anything about this. I think it's explanatory. The top 1% control 46% of the world's wealth. And it's still not enough for them. They want more. Now, I focused in specifically in the Oxfam report and on the briefing paper that they have, because they have been particularly good and faithful over the years in talking about poverty and the increase in poverty. And in 2019, they were saying the economy is broken, with hundreds of millions of people living in extreme poverty, while huge rewards go to those at the very top. I've mentioned that about the number of billionaires. The human costs, children without teachers, clinics without medicines, families without food, without housing, people without jobs, the whole issue of child labor, of trafficked labor, of the whole issue of trafficking into sexual exploitation. These are the human costs. And Oxfam is saying, and it is true, piecemeal private services punish people and privilege the elites. So there's a big push these days to have private services, whether it be private schools or private hospitals or private clinics. And this punishes the poor and privileges the elites. And the World Bank and the IMF will even go so far when there is a crisis in a country that they impose what we call austerity measures. So who pays for the crisis? The low income people in poverty, they pay because their little bit of income is cut, their services are cut so that the debt can be paid. And in all of this, women suffer the most. They're left to fill the gaps in public services with many hours of unpaid care work, not to talk about all the work that they do at home in terms of caring for children and caring for those who are sick. And as I say, today, add to that the COVID-19 experience. So we need to transform our economies. We need to transform our economies to deliver universal health. Universal is a good word that we're using in many areas, meaning it's for everybody. Universal health, education, and other public services. To make this possible, the richest people and the corporations should pay their fair share of tax. Many corporations, many businesses are in many of your countries tax-free. So they should be held accountable and they should be paying their share of tax. And the result would be a dramatic reduction in the gap between the rich and the poor and between men and women. So again, you can see here another graphic taken from this Oxfam report, getting the richest 1% to pay just 0.5% extra tax on their wealth could raise more money than it would cost to educate all the children in the world that are out of school and to provide healthcare services. This has been researched and this is documented. A very small proportion could provide the services, universal healthcare, universal education, if there was the political will to do it. Now, poverty is not inevitable. It doesn't have to be. It's caused by political choices, not by individual failings, but by political choices. Poverty is multidimensional, is disempowering, has a feminine face. I think somewhere somebody asked recently, what is the meaning of the feminization of poverty? Well, another way of putting it is that poverty has a feminine face. Women and girls experience more poverty than men, have less access to income, bank accounts, land, purchasing power, etc. Poverty is a structural issue, a power issue. And just this little graphic here at the bottom says, men own 50% more of the total wealth than women. And women earn only 87% in salaries that men earn. So there is the gender gap in salaries. And this other graphic says, a recent study in 13 developing countries found that spending on education and health accounted for 69% of the total reduction of inequality. So by focusing just on education and health, this would go a long way to reduce inequalities. Now, the position paper quotes the Universal Declaration of Human Rights with regard to the issue of poverty. And it's in paragraph 2. And I have written them down here. I don't intend to read all that's here, but to say that everyone as a member of society has a right to social security. And remember, we have been really big on rights-based. And here it is again with regard to the issue of economic justice. Everyone has a right to social security. Everyone has the right to work. Everyone has the right to equal pay for equal work. Everybody has the right to join a trade union. So Article 23 has all to do about work and the right to work. Article 25, everyone has a right to a standard of living adequate for health and well-being for himself and herself and his family and her family, including, and this is written in the Declaration, food, clothing, housing, medical care, and necessary social services. And again, Article 26, everyone has the right to education. So the rights are there, and they've been there for over 70 years. As I said to you, poverty is not inevitable. And when I came to the United Nations in 2008, 9, 10, 11, and 12, all of those years, a lot of work was done, and many of the JP contacts throughout the congregation contributed significant work towards the elaboration of the guiding principles on extreme poverty and human rights. And these principles reaffirm that people living in extreme poverty are rights holders and should be recognized as actors in the fight against poverty. So people in poverty are rights holders, and they have voices, and they have a right to say what should be done in terms of poverty. The guiding principles spell out the state's main obligations towards those living in extreme poverty. The state has responsibilities. The state, as we have said, is the duty bearer. And these guiding principles are global in scope, and they're applicable in all countries and regions at all stages of economic development, with due regard to national specificities. So it's not that they're just for the United States or for the United Nations. They were applicable in all countries and all regions. You have the link to the document there, and it was adopted in 2012, and it's one of the defining moments, as far as I'm concerned, in my journey at the United Nations and in working for change, to have these principles elaborated. And I have put them here on 2 slides for you. I'm not going to go into them because they are reiterating many of the things that I've already said from the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. Access to justice, recognition as a person before the law, protection for home and family, the adequate standard of living, food and nutrition, water and sanitation, housing, health, the right to work, social security, education, and to take part in cultural life. And there is a very excellent book which was produced by ATD Fourth World, who are a tremendous organization that works specifically with people in poverty. They don't do anything for them, they work with them, and the people do it themselves. And this book and the Franciscans International, they work together and they elaborated the various principles from the principles on extreme poverty and human rights. And they have it set up that you could use it as a workbook with groups to help them to understand what's going on and why people might be in poverty. So I recommend it very highly. And I just want to also remind you that the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty is on October 17 every year. And this year, the title is, or the theme, Acting Together to Achieve Social and Environmental Justice for All. And when I say that here about social and environmental justice, there's a very close connection between our position paper on economic justice and the position paper on integral ecology. I'm going to just cover another few things, and then we're going to take a break, and I think you will go into your breakout rooms for discussion. I think it'll be a good place to stop. What I'm moving on to now very specifically is how to measure poverty. Because I said to you earlier on, poverty is multidimensional. So often we think that poverty has only to do with not having money. It's only one aspect of it. And this multidimensional poverty index was developed in 2010, and it covers 3 broad areas: health, education, and living standards. And it looks across 10 indicators. There are 2 in terms of health, nutrition and child mortality. Children dying under the age of 5. That shouldn't happen. The whole issue of education, years of schooling and attendance. And then living standards, cooking fuel, sanitation, drinking water, electricity, housing, and then assets. And this index measures individual poverty. It's done at the household level. This chart is showing you the same thing, the health, the education, and the living standards, the different indicators, and it's elaborating a bit on the indicators. And it also shows you how these indicators are linked with the Sustainable Development Goals. Sorry, I jumped ahead. With the Sustainable Development Goals. The whole issue of health is Sustainable Goal 3, education is 4, cooking fuel has to do with clean energy is 7, clean water and sanitation is 6, drinking water is 6, affordable and clean energy, again, electricity has to do with 7, and then the whole issue of looking at housing, floor, roof and walls, this has to do with SDG 11, and then assets is around poverty. So again, the linkages are there. And I put this in, and you have the links for it, the Multidimensional Poverty Index. They do a report every year. So even the report for 2020 was launched recently. And these indicators would, as it says here, charting pathways out of multidimensional poverty. And they, as I say, they are closely aligned with the SDGs. And the link here is active if you want to follow the link and see what's in the book. And then one last point here has to do with the hidden dimensions of poverty. And this study has been recently done by ATD Fourth World again, together with Oxford University. And I think it's very important that we recognize all of these factors when we talk about people who are in poverty. And if you look at the circle inside the red, the core experiences of people living in poverty. They suffer in their body, in their minds, and in their hearts. And they try to struggle and resist, while at the same time being disempowered. Now, none of this is new to you. The diagram might be new and putting words on it, but you know it, the core experience of people living in poverty. And then disempowered people then experience deprivations or privations. And the privations are here in the green: lack of decent work, lack of income, and material and social deprivations could be food, housing, access to healthcare. So there's experience deprivations. But there's also relational dynamics at work. And I think this we need to pay attention to. How do people living in poverty experience us? Oh, sorry, gone ahead again. How do they experience us? Now, when I say us, we can reflect on ourselves and our relationship, but how do they experience government ministries? How do they experience school teachers? How are they received in the clinic? How are they addressed by the police? So they experience social maltreatment. In the United States, just Sunday, Monday, a black man of 29 years of age was shot 7 times in the back by the police. Now, there's a particular racial injustice going on at the moment, and it's really being highlighted. But when we thought we had seen all the killings that could happen, we've had this happen. Institutional maltreatments and their unrecognized contribution. Because people live in poverty, sometimes we think, well, sure, what would they know about it? They wouldn't have an opinion. What would they know? They don't know anything. So these are all interacting with one another. And then you have the modifying factors, which is their identity, the environment, their culture, beliefs, the timing and duration, and the location. So all of these come together, and these are the hidden dimensions of poverty. And I think this is very graphically, I found the graphic, but I think it sums it all up. You have the EU official coming, and his memo is more austerity. And he says to the person who's naked with a box, you have to tighten your belt. So these graphics sometimes really get at the heart of what it means to be a person in poverty, and also helps to mirror sometimes our reactions and our responses. And we ourselves are subjects of our own countries, our own cultures. Are we conservative? Are we liberal? Are we for the public service? Are we for private service? All of these things come into play. And I think this is a good point and a good place to stop in terms of having the breakout session. And so if you can keep this graphic in mind, or we go back to the continuum, where are you on the continuum? Are you a conservative? Are you a liberal? Are you a progressive? Are you for private services? Are you for public services? Do you say this person is poor, it's their own fault, they could have worked harder? Or are you saying somebody else is the cause of this? So Teresa, we'll stop here, and we'll take 10 minutes in the breakout rooms to discuss this, and we'll take some comments when people come back.
Winifred, are you ready?
Yes, maybe we'll hear maybe 4 or 5, just brief comments. any particular thing that you heard that struck you. It doesn't have to be a reporter that shares. Just if you heard something or you have something you want to share.
Jenny, Philippines.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, among us, the countries present were India, Malaysia, Philippines, and Indonesia. Common to our experience is corruption in government. Thus, budget for social services are not trickled down to our own people, and the practice also of bribery. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that the
Mary-Jean from
social
Korea.
system. Yes, go ahead, Mary-Jean.
Our small group, commonality to share that the poverty, our view of poverty is that social system, structure, political dynamics, not helping to people to develop. So the circumstances and then environments are main reasons to become a poor. It was the commonality of our
from your group. Yes. Thank you, Mary-Jean. Thank you. Yes, Goretti, and after that, Martha of Indonesia.
Okay, in our group, what Jenny told also, it has happened in our group, but not only corruption, also the culture. Some culture make people more poorer, you know, like bellies and other things. But also, there's something that's right. If the rich people really want to save some, even 0.5% for education and all, I think it will be good. So the suggestion is how to empowering the rich people to giving some of their tax or something like that for the education and all. But I also like to share, I don't have time before share, but in my experience doing the income generating or just economic justice, I think even the poor, when they have some product, sometimes they cannot market it because they need a lot of things like label, good label, how to market, and many things. So sometimes for the competition for poor is really difficult even. When they want to increase their income, how to market, it's not easy. Need a lot of structure to pass, to be sell publicly. Thank you.
Thank you, Goretti. Thank you. We are here from Martha. She raised her hand.
Yeah, thank you, Teresa. For our group, we agree that in the developing countries, the poverty caused by the system circumstances, even we found some people in the poverty in a developed country is caused by a personal issue, but in the most developing country is caused by system, culture, and circumstance. And for me, I think my view is that the poverty is also really influenced by power relation and patriarchal culture, because for example, since the baby, even someone since the baby living in the poverty and maybe she has a female gender, so when she grew up, be the teenager and adulthood, she like face many intersection, many challenges, many problem, many challenge to access like a better future. Yeah, that's my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you. And we'll hear one last one, maybe, from Peter, and then Winifred can summarize. Peter?
Yes. In our group, we had two views. One is common view, most of majority express that. That is a social political system that is in the country, which is also attached with the corruption and selfish motives of the higher class and higher category. And the second one is, we had one participant from Singapore, Stacy, and Singapore has got autocracy. You have to work hard for your survival. That is the rule there. So everyone is expected to work hard, but the resources are not equally distributed between all. So if you have less resources, even if you work hard, you will remain unequal to those who have more resources. Same thing in most of the countries, the sharing of resources, the responsibility, political system and the structure, social structures have to take the equal distribution of the resources. That is the main point that is emerging.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you.
Okay.
Over to you, Winifred.
Thank you very much to everybody for those rich sharings and comments. And as far as I can see, we're everywhere along the continuum. You know, from saying, you know, oh, it's the person's own fault. That's the reason they're poor. They don't work hard enough. Right up to saying, well, you know, we have to have redistribution. And I'll just pick up on one point. I put a big asterisk on it. How empower rich people to give. Goretti, I don't accept that. The thing is, how can we do advocacy such that taxes are progressive, that everybody pays their fair share of tax? If the government is the duty bearer and the government needs money to provide services, then the government should levy taxes to enable those services to develop. Now, I say that, Goretti, having been with the ambassador from Indonesia some years ago, when Indonesia, it was a big celebration here in New York, and actually I was part of it because I promote social protection floors, when they roll out universal health care throughout Indonesia. Now, you're the ones that would have to say it happened or it didn't happen, but the intention was good, and there seemed to be, the whole government seemed to be involved and saying healthcare would be made available to everybody. We'll talk more about that as we go along. So this is where I think advocacy is more important, that we bring pressure to bear on the government to exercise its responsibilities. And I hear you talking about when government doesn't exercise their responsibilities, we have corruption. That's another part of it. So let me just finish the PowerPoint, and we can see what other time there is. And then we have the opportunity in the next session in terms of application. Okay, so here is where I left off, and I'm going to move into what I have done a lot of work here in New York, and I think throughout the congregation trying to create awareness, but it seems a difficult one. Around the whole issue of national floors of social protection. And this is mentioned in the position paper in 6B and 6F, paragraph 6B and 6F. And it's also part of the Sustainable Development Goal 1.3. But the national floors of social protection were adopted before we had the SDGs. And there are 4 essential components: universal health care, I mentioned it there with regard to Indonesia; universal child benefits, Now, I attended a global meeting on child benefits in Geneva last November. And the World Bank and the IMF were the two biggest proponents, telling countries you cannot afford to do that. Because if you do that, you're going to increase the debt, you don't have enough taxation, etc., etc. So the will might be there to do it, but there are other groups that say no. And one country that was talked about at that time was Mongolia. They wanted to have universal child benefits. Then benefits for unemployment, sickness, and maternity benefits and disability benefits, and then that there would be universal pensions for older people. And I saw this, I was in Kenya after pensions were rolled out throughout the country for everybody who was 70 and older. And I was in a group in the city, and there were older women, and they had come together to form a self-help group, and they were income generating, and they were talking about what it meant in their lives to have their own money in their own hand. These older women, 70 years of age and above, for the first time being recognized as a person that might require money, and it actually being put in their hands, and how they were using it in terms of their grandchildren. It was a marvelous evening, these immersion experiences in terms of social protection for older people. So this would be the advocacy, and this has been agreed by 186 countries in the world. This is agreed. And the trade unions have agreed to this, and the governments have agreed to it, and the employers have agreed to it. So it has a certain, what I say, knowledge of it as a policy, and somewhat the political will to implement it. But of course, what always comes up is we don't have the funds. And again, there are a number of principles behind universal social protection and social protection floors, universal entitled, that they be adequate, non-discriminatory, address social justice, provide high quality service. It's not a two-tiered or a three-tiered service. It's a service that is quality service for everyone. And as I say, it's in the position paper as an advocacy point that we ought to be taking up. And again, the SDGs, when they were adopted in 2015, provided a further momentum. Now, I had worked at the UN in terms of saying that we should have a goal on social protection. That was the level at which we were trying to work, but that didn't come about. All we got was a target, 1.3. Universal health, SDG 3, the whole issue of gender equality and unpaid care work and domestic work, the whole issue of full employment and decent work in SDG 8, and then the whole issue of reducing inequalities. Somebody brought up the discussion about, maybe it was in my small group, about inequality. So we need to adopt policies that bring about a greater equality in the country in terms of the redistribution of wealth. And I think in our group they were saying there's plenty of resources in our country, but oftentimes the resources are taken out by the corporate sector or by companies coming from Europe or from America. And they exploit the people in terms of cheap labor, and they take out all the profits. Let me see what's at the top of this. Yes, I just want to highlight for you two big words in terms of the reality today. Some people think capitalism is the fault. And capitalism is something that came about, the Industrial Revolution, all of that. Capital was put to work, and there was production and employment. But somewhere in the 1970s, capitalism began to change and how capital was used. And part of capitalism, the idea behind it was that the markets would solve the problem of poverty, because, and somebody in my group, I think, used trickle down, that there would be a trickle down effect, that if there was plenty of money in the country, somewhere it would kind of come down and the people at the bottom would get it. Now, this did not happen. And it's a false idea. It's a myth. It hasn't happened. So what has happened since the 70s is that gradually finance, money, and not productive investment started to be the driving force. And we have what we call speculative finance. And this is the engine for growth. And this is what gives rise to the stock exchange. Is it up or is it down? And the result was an acceleration of the process of debt buildup. So this brought about bigger debts in countries, because the institutionalized feature of the economy resulted in financialization. Credit was the substitute for wages. People were taking out credit instead of getting wages. And governments were facilitating that. Financialization refers to the increasing importance of financial markets, financial motives, financial institutions, and financial elites in the operation of the economy and its governing institutions. Today, many corporations and the corporate sector are richer in money and in capital and in finance than are any of the governments. And in some places, the governments are owned by these companies. So that's what we've happening. And this is the reason why today people are in poverty and are increasingly now with COVID being pushed into further into poverty. And if I can illustrate everything I have said by saying previously you had one company that have 200 employees and they'd be all getting a salary. Today you have one employee and 200 companies. So all the money is going up and it's circulating around the world in cyberspace. An increase in the stock market may not really reflect consumer confidence. It may just be the effect of elites passing money among themselves. And you can read more about that in the link there. And moving on from financialization and capitalism, in some of the writings today, and certainly in the women's major group, they talk about neoliberal capitalism. And it's really the privatization of public utilities and the deregulation of financial markets. And linked with that is the whole idea of free trade. We want no regulations around trade. It's whoever has it can do it. And there's no responsibility for a country. There's no responsibility for the people in the country. And its effect has favored a policy agenda which has vastly increased power and prestige of finance capital. Banks, hedge funds, lenders, these are the people that have the money in general at the expense of everybody else. And that's where I come back to what Goretti said. This is what we have to advocate and stand up against. not to cajole them into giving us a little bit of money to help people. This is what I believe the advocacy around economic justice is about. Yes, we're doing what we can in terms of alleviating poverty with communities in groups where we are, how we can, where we can. We hear about the difficulty of selling on the market. And that's all part of this. There is no room for us to sell on the market. When I say us, I mean the small people. So manufacturers, consumers, workers, borrowers, we're all the victims of what's happening. And this is very subtle, and it's happening in the world. So this results in increasing equality in and between countries. And if you want to look at SDG 10, it's a good place to look. Harmful trade agreements. Oftentimes this is around intellectual property rights being given to corporations. The right to food. We have huge food insecurity because of agribusiness. The right to conserve. I saw in Ethiopia, when I went there first, the farmers would sow the first seed potatoes, they'd cut their seed, prepare it, sow the first lot, hope the rains came. If they didn't come, they had another lot of seed ready and they went out and they sowed that and hopefully the second crop would come. And then when they'd harvest, they'd put away their seed and then they would be ready for the next year in terms of sowing. And then everything changed. And there was a law made that they had to buy the seed potato and they had to buy the fertilizer. And they had to sow it all at the one time. And if they weren't able, because the crop didn't come, to pay for the fertilizer and to pay for the seed, they were imprisoned. This is the agribusiness at work. The right to sell seed, the right to access essential medicines. Look what will happen if and when a vaccine becomes available in terms of COVID-19. Will it be available to everybody? Or will it only be for the elites? So this is it in our concrete reality today. There's unprecedented scale of threat to the ecosystem and biodiversity, threatening the existence of human society itself. And as I say, we'll be looking at that next month. Commodification of the land and accelerating global phenomenon of land and resource grabbing. And who loses their land? The small farmer. Then there's food insecurity. Land grabbing has far-reaching negative impacts on local people's access to essential goods and services, apart from displacement and environmental degradation that's associated with it. And even during COVID, here in the United States, there was a big concern, how are we going to get our food? Because migrants weren't coming into the country, they weren't at work, who was going to harvest it? And then the people in the agribusiness started having sickness from COVID, and therefore, what were they to do with the pigs? All of this was a huge crisis. So when all the resources are held by a few people, that's a problem. And this is entrenched patriarchal foundations that structure the capitalist system. There's no place for women in this. So these two slides are difficult, but I've tried to make them as simple as possible and put them in today's terms. And this is it graphically. You have the big machine here, the free trade and globalization machine, and it eats up everyone. This is the reality. So how do we stand against this reality? We have the pollution, environmental destruction, consumer junk, And then we have the cheap labor, and all we're interested in is global GDP. Do you see the arrow there going up, full speed ahead? How do we stand against this? And the answer is given to us by Pope Francis, really. He is the best person I know to speak in terms of the economy and what's happening and what we need to do. And he is not shy in using words to critique global, that should not be finalization, it should be financialization. I see all these things immediately when I go to read it, of the markets. So it's to critique the present global financialization of the markets. When human beings place themselves at the center, this is his answer. They are given absolute priority to immediate convenience, and all else becomes relative. It is the mindset of those who say, let the invisible forces of the market regulate the economy. This is what financialization says, and consider their impacts on society and nature as collateral damage. I heard the sisters in the Philippines talking a little bit about this. Pope Francis has a number of initiatives that you might like to look at. The economy of Francesco. You can look at the link of it. And this is where he has brought groups of young people together. And they have come together to impact the system at large by identifying, and I thought the word was interesting, acupuncture pressure points, and to stimulate them to make people and organizations flourish and not just profit. So where can we find the point to bring pressure in this system such that it changes from eating us all up to enabling us to flourish and our organizations to flourish? So, as I say, groups of young people he has engaged in this. And he also meets with this Council for Inclusive Capitalism, very different to the global financialization. They're a non-profit dedicated to promoting inclusive capitalism. He encouraged the Council to persevere along the path of generous solidarity and to work for the return of economics and finance to an ethical approach which favors human beings. And we said at the very beginning, poverty is an offense to the dignity of the person. That's in the position paper, but this is it. How can we have ethics that favor human beings over profit? Some little bit of work in terms of the UN that is done in this context is the guiding principles on business and human rights. Again, our famous statement is there, the state duty to protect, the corporate responsibility to respect, and then there should be access to remedy. Where there are injustices, they should be remedied. But the state should protect. And I said to you, oftentimes the state is not able to do that because they're owned by the corporate sector. So how can they protect if they're already owned? The corporate responsibility is to respect. And again, you can follow some of that there through the link. Christina Duranti with the GSIF, together with the Democratic Republic of Congo, the mining project that they have there, they sometimes go to Geneva to follow this process. We have special rapporteurs in terms of human rights, and we should, in a sense, try and see what they're doing and where they are, because unlike some other rapporteurs in terms of the feminist issue and the women's agenda, these rapporteurs are as eager and dedicated as we are in terms of putting people at the center. This current man only nominated in 2020, Olivier de Schutte from Belgium. He was the special rapporteur on food at another time in his life. He is excellent and very much promotes social protection and social protection floors. And the previous special rapporteur, Philip Alston from Australia, he has just written his report on his visit to Malaysia, and it might be well worth pulling out the document and seeing what did he say about poverty in Malaysia and the government. He did 2 visits, one to the United States and one to the UK. And well, usually he's scathing when he speaks anyway, but in both countries, he didn't leave anything unsaid. Will it make any difference? Who knows? But these people need us to support them. And before him was Magdalena Sepulveda. She's from Chile. She was the person who did the extreme poverty and human rights, the guiding principles. So I've had this history of working with them and knowing what they're doing. Now, to conclude, the position paper says, we also understand that there is a prophetic call to stand against systems and structures of economic injustice, some of which we may be a part of. So how are we complicit in the financial structures? This quote is from paragraph 4 of the position paper, and at the top of it there, I've put in the symbols of all the world religions, which basically say, peace be with you, and who basically want the well-being of people. Now, so what does it mean in terms of a prophetic call? The position paper says it's coming from the Judeo-Christian scriptures, Catholic social teaching, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. But I am quoting from the Prophet Muhammad, who said he, and we have to go with the idea that gender equality wasn't around in his day. He says, he who sleeps on a full stomach while his neighbor goes hungry is not one of us. Now, I think that's fairly clear. And in the United Nations, there is this mosaic, the Golden Rule, which depicts people from different nationalities standing together with the words, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And going back to Pope Francis and his encyclical, The Joy of the Gospel, I picked out these few headings in terms of helping us in terms of what might be a prophetic stance. And he says, no to an economy of exclusion, no to the new idolatry of money, no to a financial system which rules rather than serves, and no to inequality which spawns violence. So he's very clear there. The word is no. And to conclude, I'm more or less bringing together some actions that might need to be taken, or that you can engage in, or maybe you're already engaged in. And I put a list here, not in any particular order, but to keep them in mind. So the whole income gap and the gender pay gap. Women's groups will be very much advocating there. Fiscal wage policies and social protection with the Global Coalition for Social Protection Floors. The whole issue of the informal economy. There's a lot of talk at the moment about getting rid of the informal economy. Again, this is government's role. The whole issue of tax and tax system and tax justice and redistributive justice. And there is a group that call themselves Tax Justice for Women's Rights, and they sometimes have global days of action. Fair trade. Illicit financial flows. We didn't talk very much about that, but money that should stay in your countries is flowing out of your country to hedge funds. And this is the money that makes billionaires richer and richer. You're very aware of the issue of corruption. We mentioned about the special rapporteurs. Oftentimes there are debt campaigns. And currently, again, with the Global Coalition for Social Protection Floor, there is a campaign on with regard to trying to do some advocacy with the World Bank and the IMF because they don't seem to be willing to make the necessary concessions to countries in this COVID time so that the debt is not, the burden of debt is not increased. And yet they seem to be holding out and not being in any way sensitive to COVID-19. So debt campaigns. And of course, we didn't touch on military spending. Global military spending grew 3.6% in 2019. So it continues to grow. We never hear that there's a shortage of money for military spending. Oftentimes we advocate saying even if that 3.6 increase was given towards services or social protection, how far would it go? And then just the fair and progressive tax system, tax justice would bring about better education. It would cope with the unpaid care burden, health services, reduce violence, have access to clean water and provide social protection. I just highlighted those there, those taking them from my blog where in 2017 I had been sharing this kind of work. And again, another graphic, again, you see the rich get richer, tax is optional. You know, tax paid, zip, nil, zero. But the tax payable is 10.6 billion. You know, so it says, are you stupid? This is what we're up against. So where do we find an acupressure point in terms of massaging to be able to have it brought about that it's justice to redistribute money among people and that people are the center, not the profit. And then just two organizations that I have some respect for, a lot of respect for IBON in the Philippines. They do a lot of work in terms of the environment, but also in terms of the current global systems of production and consumption is unsustainable and profit driven for the benefits of the elite. So that's what I've said. I'm just highlighting them as an organization that you might want to associate with or advocate with, because we cannot do this work on our own. We cannot do it either as an individual or as a community. We have to mobilize with other people to do it. And again, another group, people over profit. And this wants to hold the international financial institutions, which is the World Bank and the IMF, they want to hold them responsible in terms of austerity measures. When they say you have to cut back on social services so that you can pay your debt. So this also, it's an international organization, and they are also against free trade agreements, because free trade agreements do not benefit a country. Taxes are not paid and the resources are taken out. And Pope Francis said, an inclusive capitalism leaves no one behind. And in the end, it's not simply a matter of having more, but being more. And the human person may always be placed at the center of social, cultural, and economic life. An economic system detached from ethical concerns does not bring about a more just social order, but leads to a throwaway culture of consumption and waste. When the moral dimension of economic life is recognized, we are able to act with fraternal charity, desiring, seeking, and protecting the good of others and their integral development. Almost every time Pope Francis speaks, he has something to say in these lines. And again, I just want to highlight the SDG 12. Sometimes I don't have opportunities to do so, on consumption and production. And the position paper talks about increasing our awareness of consumerism at the individual, community, and systemically. What we've done tonight is to try and look at the systemic issues, to link personal purchasing and communal investment with production, labor rights, and environmental sustainability. I think many of our bursars and indeed Yolanda in Rome would be very aware of this, of realizing that not to be putting our money in to get more profit, yes, to get profit, to make money, but also to recognize that it's ethical investment, and looking at the supply chain, making sure there's no child labor there, making sure that products, fair trade, etc., that there's environmental sustainability. This is all important. And then the question again, what's our complicity in unjust structures and in this market that is happening around us? The position paper, my bar goes and I can't read it. That's not the one, this one. The position paper 6D talks about essential for analysis, education, and advocacy. We must do analysis. We have to educate ourselves to do analysis. When we do analysis, when we're educated and do analysis, then we advocate. So I'm proposing that we have to learn how to unmask the systemic roots. We have to expose poverty as violence to the human spirit. We have to understand how weak rule of law, inadequate government systems, unethical trade systems, and corporate practices underpin and sustain poverty, and engage people in poverty. And to do all of that, you have to know. So we're back again to learning. And finally, I leave you with this summing up. In my view, the root of all root causes is the globalization of finance, the financialization of the markets and corporate greed. And I see that, you can see I put it there in the center as the root of all root causes, when we talk about poverty, human trafficking, the girl child, migration, prostitution, or climate change. So I leave you with that. I think we do have some, maybe a few minutes for any questions. Do we, Teresa?
Yes, yes, we do. We do. And
you have
yes.
something to do at the end. So I was just trying to keep an eye on the watch.
Yes. I just want to thank Winifred for that very big worldview on the push factors resulting in poverty. And the whole discourse today was about poverty and its relationship to the economic justice position paper. And we also need to ask ourselves, as we were listening to Winifred and how she ended the session, that the important thing is how do we ourselves educate ourselves on that whole global system and that whole financialization of the economy that's happening at the moment. I just want to also point that in the chat group, very interestingly, we have a comment from Joan, which I would like to read out because, a comment from Joan that says, comments also included, that sometimes as a congregation, like the church, we are also in the position where we own assets, big properties, live in comfort, and are really not in the real sense with the poor or understand what is the experience of those in situations of poverty. And another reaction from Teresa Mandakath from Southwest India is this: church holds much property. What about us, our congregation, when it comes down to the poor, our attitudes and question mark? And there's some discourses on that as well. I think it's also important that we look at ourselves at this point. And I want to ask if you have any reactions, any reflections from the group. I think it will be really good to hear from each other for a few minutes. Just raise your hand or unmute yourself and share.
Even Teresa, the two comments you read out, like they are the reality for many of us. You know, the safety of house, the food on the table, etc., etc. And I think like there's no virtue in poverty, but it's, I think this is what the prophetic call is about. How number one, how do we use our resources? Number two, what do we know about what is happening? And I think then the other thing is, where do we personally invest? And I gave you some groups there that I know of in terms, as I say, we cannot do this on our own, but where am I committed to continue to learn, to push one particular thing? Social protection floors, tax justice, gender justice, you know, we're all coming at it, but I think this is the prophetic aspect of it. And yes, we have a congregational position and we have our ministries, and part of doing this was saying, how can we even be more aware of this in our ministries? And I think with regard to the poverty, the big thing, particularly from the studies that are done of people who live in poverty, is they have the answers themselves. And they will, if given the opportunity, also speak with government. But it's how do we bring, it's not we that bring them, how do we facilitate them to do it? Because they also need the opportunity to hear this kind of thing and to be linked with groups and to be given the opportunity. Sorry now for coming in and giving more. I couldn't help myself.
Yes, thank you, Winifred, thank you. And I agree with you that we should recognize our position of privilege and also our position of influence, right from the program participants that we are engaged with, right up to the top level of where governments and financial institutions sit. And that's where we are able to bridge that gap and open up opportunities in terms of economic justice. And we must do something Yes, Joan, did you want to share something?
Yes, just following on what you were also saying and what Winifred said. It's not to kind of say we should give up everything and go and sit with the poor. A lot of us sometimes say, oh, we are in this, we are also part of the rich. We are also part of the rich. But it must move us to then provide opportunities and push us to share resources. It is not about saying, we are, keep on repeating this, this kind of a statement that, oh, we are one of those who are in the rich category. And so beat ourselves. No, we take the opportunity to then find ways to share resources and find equitable means of people getting opportunity to be empowered. And also, as Winifred said, maybe try to see how we can look at people who are exploiting and work together to do something about that, be a voice.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you. It looks like the next session that we have on application will be very interesting, because we should be able to unpack all this and ask ourselves, where do we stand in relation to our ministries and programs? Someone else? Maybe one last reaction or two? I'm not sure about all of you, but I feel very disturbed at the moment.
Yes.
Yes, yes, Katrina, yes. I'm disturbed as to what I can do differently. Yes.
Yeah, I disturb also.
Yes.
What I get from this presentation, I get that something, the changing have to be from the mindset. So what I understand is not, we are not doer anymore. We are enabler for the poor. How to bring them to get the access and facilities that connect them to the government. So I think this is a whole mindset that have to change. How is our approach to the mission, and how we approach the mission, and enable, as we enable the poor, to connect them, to link them to the for those who can really share. Before is the way our approach is like we ask, then we give. We give. So we do it. We do. We are the one doer as an individual or community. No, we are enabler. So I think they will have to change all the way we do our approach in the mission. I think this is what I get, and this is really will bring the shift of consciousness from within, and all and together as a region, as a unit, that as we are really have to change the way to do our mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina. So what you're sharing is that how do we shift from the charity and the needs-based into a rights-based model? Because when we are in a rights-based model, we are journeying together with the program participants. But in a needs-based model, we ask the program participants, what do you need? And then, sometimes we take on the role of the business manager whilst they produce. And then that becomes a different model altogether. So we need to ask ourselves at the next application session, where is our stand, and what is our own approach to economic justice and our own understanding of economic justice. So I want to thank everyone and thank Winifred for really giving us a very deep session today. Winifred, do you have any last words for us before we close?
No, I'm talked out.
Yes. Thank you very much. Can we see the reactions of people, how you're viewing this whole thing, either a thumbs up sign, a clap sign, or whatever? Yeah, really good. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah. For the 6 or 7 of us who will stay back after this for our project on the girl child, I will stop this Zoom link in 5 minutes. And if we could come back again at 12:15 for the 6 or 7 of us who are coming for the second meeting, I will send you the Zoom link separately. We come back again at 12:15. So I will stop this Zoom link at 12:05 so that you can say goodbye and, you know, chat with people across the region and wave to each other, etc.
Bye.
Bye-bye.